Francis Ngannou has just bankrupted the PFL and fleeced them for all their money, and in return has given them 10,000 pay-per-view buys and about $500,000 in pay-per-view money generated. Dana White's been proven completely right, so I'm just going to give him the floor here and let him gloat about his prediction. And anyone that was supporting Ngannou, you can continue to support Ngannou, but don't lie and say he's a big pay-per-view draw and that Dana White is shaking in his boots by the fact that he's fighting Renan Ferreira. But let's listen on to Dana White's gloat.
The only one who's praying for his demise is probably the PFL, because they signed a shitty contract with a guy that doesn't deliver any numbers and ticket sales or pay-per-views. So, and they got to keep paying this guy for however long, and good for him, and not good for them.
If anyone knows about the money that Ngannou is being paid and what he brings to the table, it's Dana White. He's obviously sold a lot of pay-per-views because of Francis Ngannou, or I suppose not a lot of pay-per-views, because apparently Ngannou's biggest pay-per-views were about 350,000 pay-per-view buys, and that was the first Stipe fight. I'll show you something here quickly. So obviously it's saying here, this is reported by Dave Meltzer, by the way, a very trusted source. 10,000 pay-per-view buys was Ngannou bought to PFL. He brought them $500,000 in pay-per-view revenue. And his opponent, who was a no-one name, by the way, $2 million he got paid. Ngannou was guaranteed $8 million, and then $12 million for his next fight. And on top of that, just for signing with the PFL, they just threw $2 million at him. For reference, him versus Stipe in their first fight sold 350,000 pay-per-view buys. That's it. If there's anybody here that knows what they're dealing with when it comes to Ngannou, it's Dana White. He knows Francis Ngannou is in this big draw. He's in like this Mike Tyson type figure, as much as an MMA fan wants to believe that he is. He ain't bringing them nothing, and this is what he has to say afterwards.
Francis was like, I was all about Francis in the beginning, and then I found out who Francis was. And I told the two guys who asked me not to cut Francis, when somebody shows you who they are, believe them. And, yeah, believe me, I have no sleepless nights over Francis leaving.
So just two more.
Dana White's completely right. Why would he have sleepless nights about Francis Ngannou leaving? He's bringing 300,000 pay-per-views to the table. Against Cyril Gane, I think he brought about 200,000. Those numbers weren't just told to the public for obvious reasons. Only when they do big numbers like the Sphere did 1 million buys do they ever get released in any way, shape or form. Ngannou's embarrassment of pay-per-view buys obviously weren't going to get released. His second fight with Stipe wasn't released. None of these numbers were released. So there's that. There's no way Dana White's losing sleep over the fact, oh no, Ngannou is going to the PFL. What if now PFL has a massive boom or whatever? He knows he ain't bringing nothing to the table. If Ngannou was selling like 1 million buys in the UFC, maybe in the PFL he sells 100,000 plus buys. But turns out, nope, 10,000 buys because no one cares. And the fact that it was happening in the Middle East with a different time obviously wasn't going to do well. So the PFL really got stuck with $500,000, something that probably isn't even enough to pay for like the prelims of the event they put on, let alone Renan Ferreira and Ngannou's combined purse of $10 to $12 million. It's crazy. I think Dana White has something more to say here. And also, I'm not above the idea of saying that Francis Ngannou could just be a bad person. I'm not saying he's a bad person in terms of like his morals and ethics, but in terms of just like, I don't care what you make, I'm making this much. If I'm not getting what I want, I'm leaving. And the only people stupid enough to fall for that entire Francis Ngannou is the biggest star in the sport, all that yada yada, was the PFL, who for some reason decided to pay Francis Ngannou boxing kind of money. I think he made $10 million against Tyson Fury, a way bigger fight. And PFL's like, you know what, we'll just match it. You versus Renan Ferreira, that's worth $10 million. And there was Cristiano Ronaldo in the crowd and he was smiling along like he wouldn't immediately forget what Renan Ferreira's name is 5 minutes after leaving the event. He was paid to be there as well. It wasn't this big event that they would want you to believe it was. It really wasn't. It really wasn't. But anyway, Dana White continues his onslaught of the PFL and Francis Ngannou.
More things on this.
Yep.
You wanted to cut him, but he went on to become the UFC heavyweight champion. So I guess what does that say about that thought process?
Yeah.
Does it show he should have stayed?
Well, no. I didn't like Francis as a person. Wasn't a guy I wanted to do business with. My boys were telling me he's misunderstood. And I told them, when somebody shows you who they are, believe them. Yeah, it wasn't about him becoming the heavyweight champion of the world. Francis isn't a good guy. He plays the good guy. I don't understand the language, and so he seems like he's a nice guy. He's not, and he's just not a guy that I wanted to be in business with. Period. End of story. Whether
I'm just gonna pause it there. I'm just gonna stop the video right there for now. Dana White's completely right. Dana White, Francis Ngannou strikes me as the type of guy that's like, I don't care what you make, I'm making this much. And obviously PFL is the only promotion stupid enough to be paying him what he thinks he's worth. Because if you remember when he left the UFC, a lot of promotions like Bare Knuckle and One Championship were saying, okay, Francis Ngannou is being extremely unreasonable with the amount of money that he wants. And One Championship is almost a money laundering business, so even they weren't willing to pay him. You know why? Because they knew they were going to lose massive tons of money. Only because the Middle Eastern princes have put some of their own money into the PFL can they even afford Francis Ngannou. But in terms of a business, like trying to grow a business, having Francis Ngannou leave the UFC and have him fighting a guy that nobody knows is not going to generate any interest for anybody. Francis Ngannou's stock is no higher now after the fact that he's beaten Renan Ferreira than it was before the fact. At all, in my opinion. And they should have seen it coming. It was so obvious. It was so obvious. Look at some of these numbers. Ngannou versus Stipe 1 does 340 to 380,000 pay-per-view buys. That is apparently right in line with the numbers that Chris Cyborg did a pay-per-view ago. A women's featherweight title fight did almost identical numbers to what Ngannou brought to the table against Stipe in their first fight. Almost identical. And that card with Cyborg and Holly Holmes had nothing other than Khabib versus Edson Barboza. And Cyborg was the co-main event of this PFL event. The co-main event, and they still combined to give you 10,000 pay-per-view buys. An embarrassing number, in all honesty. And then there was other evidence, like the fact that Tyson Fury is one of the biggest names in boxing in the world right now. And him and Francis Ngannou together brought around apparently 10,000 pay-per-view buys for TV audiences, I believe. It definitely didn't do over 100. Oh, and Ariel Helwani lies. Never mind about that. But yeah. Then the Anthony Joshua fight. Okay, you're thinking, okay, Anthony Joshua is an even bigger name than Fury. What did he bring to the table? Together, they brought about 4,600 pay-per-view buys? That's what they were bringing to the table? And apparently it was less than half of what him and Fury did, which was about 11,500. In combination and combined, those two things together gave you 15,000 pay-per-view buys from television. I understand you can stream in other ways, and there's other ways to get a fight. We have to pay this way or that way, and obviously there's other markets in the world other than just the United States. But US should be the biggest market for combat sports in terms of mixed martial arts. And in terms of boxing, I feel like Tyson Fury versus Deontay Wilder wasn't bombing out like this. And apparently Paul versus Diaz did big numbers. And apparently so did Canelo, who's a massive Mexican star, still bringing in massive numbers in the US, in the United States though. Insanity that they thought this was what he was worth. And Dana White called it a while back as well. Here's him shitting on the PFL earlier on a year ago. And let's listen to it, because overall this is just a Dana White appreciation post. Because he got a lot of flack on Twitter by people saying, pay Ngannou what he's worth this much. No, you can't be paying him only $3 million. What's that? Only 5% of pay-per-view shares? Give him more, give him 50. Makes no sense, because if you give him 50%, it has to be solely based on Ngannou bringing in those buys. And let's be honest, the UFC promotion, the fact that it's a UFC event happening, fans will see that a UFC pay-per-view is happening, and they'll just pay for it, just out of habit. Okay, so what are the fights on this weekend? No one's going, what are the PFL fights on? They're thinking, okay, the UFC's having a pay-per-view. Who's on the card? Before they even look at the card, they're like, okay, so do you want to come over? Do you want to come over? Like, let's see who's available this weekend. And then they look at the card and they're like, okay, it's a decent card. I wish Ngannou wasn't main eventing. No, I'm just kidding. But, am I? Really? Let's listen on to it.
What they're doing makes no sense to me. Their business strategy. I'm hearing that they're raising money right now, 280 million, 300 million, I don't know what the number is, from the Middle East. And I've done a lot of business in the Middle East. Those guys are sharp, and they know what to do. I don't know who in the hell would give them $280 million, because I'm hearing they're buying Bellator, right? So
let's just pause it there for just a quick second. So obviously Dana White, again, has a lot of experience dealing with the Middle Eastern guys. The Middle East, I know they have a lot of money, but they don't just want to throw away their money down the drain. They obviously thought in some capacity this PFL event would have some sort of success, because the reason if you don't know any better, the Middle East is a pretty corrupt part of the world. Like Saudi Arabia, Abu Dhabi, a lot of people go missing that speak against them. So they're trying to hide the entire coverage. Like I heard like reporters going missing there for speaking out about the regime there. So what they basically do is they get big sporting events to hide the fact that they're really corrupt countries. And as a result, we end up getting events like the PFL, where they probably think, okay, so Francis Ngannou is a big name. We get him on the card. It's a big thing. People will be talking about it. It'll do some sort of numbers. Maybe not UFC numbers, but some sort of numbers. Nope. The moment it ends, the next day, Ngannou's forgotten about it, let's be honest here. And then what? And then what? And now, going forward, they're probably not going to be putting in the same amount of money they did the first time around. They're like, okay, what's that? You bought 10,000 pay-per-view buys to the table? 10,000? They're probably thinking, okay, if we get a bare knuckle event, it'll probably do about similar numbers to that. That's honestly what they're probably thinking right now. Dana White's completely right. He has no clue what's going on with the PFL and how they're handling the business.
So you're an organization that's burning cash, have no ratings and selling no tickets, and you're going to raise $280 million to buy a company that's burning cash, sells no tickets, and does no ratings. It sounds fucking absolutely genius to me.
Completely right. And also that $280 million number. I'm not sure if it was officially confirmed or if this is just another spewing of nonsense by the PFL, because they did say they were going to spend around about $20 million, like similar numbers to the Sphere, for their Battle of the Giants event. Nonsense. There's no way they did that. And if they did do that, I mean, more power to them for just burning all that money away. But I'm sure you probably could have put on some more fun events. I mean, and on top of everything else, by the way, let me just put this out there. Battle of the Giants, Decision Fest. Of course they can't get any fighters that have any finishing potential. There was like maybe like 2 finishes on the entire card. And it wasn't even like near... And one of them was Ngannou getting a finish. So shout out to Ngannou. I guess he is worth $10 million. Jesus.
And I don't know. I know how this story ends. I get what Francis is doing. I wish the PFL all the luck in the world. I wish him all the luck in the world. It's just not what we do here.
Yeah, so Dana White says he wishes the PFL all the luck in the world and he knows what Ngannou's doing. You know what that means? Ngannou's tried to pull this shit on the UFC, and the UFC can actually make some profit of paying Ngannou $10 million because the Jones fight is so massive, it'll do big numbers no matter what. But he knows Ngannou's trying to take a lot of money from these smaller corporations. I'm saying smaller corporations. The UFC is a massive corporation. I'm talking about the PFL here. Even the UFC, a huge company that was willing to pay a lot of fighters what they're worth, to be honest. Like, Khabib made a ridiculous amount of money. Conor McGregor obviously speaks for itself. Nate Diaz made a ridiculous amount of money when they proved that they were draws. Ngannou brought 350,000 pay-per-view buys to the table. Asked for $10 million from the UFC. Got laughed at. Left. And then fleeced the PFL. And the PFL just couldn't... They just couldn't see through this. Honestly, if the PFL just went to the Middle East and put together a really fun card, let's say, what's his name, Sam Hughes, ended up fighting like Pitbull for the title, and they hyped it up for a while. Or you know what, Sam Hughes versus Usman Magomedov. Conor McGregor's getting involved in the Twitter Spaces. They talk shit to each other. Irish guy versus one of the Magomedovs probably does more than 10,000 pay-per-view buys. I think there's some interest in that. I feel like a lot of people, like especially the Irish, would be into that. I feel like that does more than 10,000 pay-per-view buys, right? But nope, we had to get Ngannou here. Massive farce of a thing. PFL in shambles, honestly. PFL ain't this big rival to the UFC that they want you to believe he is. I showed you the numbers. The numbers speak for themselves. He couldn't do big numbers with Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua. I don't know why anyone thought he was going to do big numbers with Renan Ferreira. A nobody that nobody knows. But I guess the Middle East is giving them money. And if they continue to give him money, more power to him. I'm just expecting them to be smart enough to be like, you know what? 10,000 pay-per-view buys. The amount of exposure we're getting is not worth the $200 million we're giving you. Which I'm not sure is even real, by the way. They're probably done with the PFL. They're probably like, okay, Let's go here. How about we get bare knuckle in the Middle East? They're probably thinking more often. At least Conor McGregor will be there in the crowd, probably. Go into the cage, give a bit of an interview, hype up the next event. Probably will do a better job of hyping up his fights than the PFL did with Francis Ngannou. That's the PFL for you, bankrupting themselves over and over again, have no direction, no end sight. And what's next for Ngannou? $12 million to fight who? Who is there in MMA in the heavyweight division outside the UFC? Nobody. Even in the UFC, who is there? Outside Tom Aspinall, John Jones, and maybe Cyril Gane? What, like Curtis Blades? If it was Curtis Blades versus Ngannou in the PFL, would that do over 10,000 buys? Maybe it'll do like 15,000, but that's as high as I'm about to go. There's nothing. Anyway, like, share, and subscribe, but don't share, that's stupid. Like and subscribe. I'm at 74 subscribers. Let's get me to 80. Alright, see you guys.